Today I am going to explain in 11th Biobotany first unit diversity in the living world. In first unit, first chapter, the living world. So living. So generally living organisms are aggregation of molecules. These aggregated molecules express themselves through different types of chemical reactions. All these chemical reactions is known as a metabolic reactions. Metabolic reactions. So living organisms body by the aggregation of different types of molecules, nothing but chemicals. These chemicals express themselves through the different types of chemical reactions. All some chemical reactions is known as a metabolic reactions. Main purpose of these metabolic reactions are transform. That means transform the biomolecules constantly from one form to another form. Results of these transform produce the products. Nothing but produce the energy, maybe in some other form of metabolic reactions. Consume the energy, nothing but produce the energy and consume the energy. So main purpose of these metabolic reactions are transformation, that means produce the products energy, then consume the energy, like assimilation, anabolic and catabolic process. Sum of all these reactions cumulatively, this all reactions is known as a metabolism. Cumulatively, this whole chemical reactions is known as a metabolism. Through the metabolism, synthesize the other form of biomolecules. These act as a carbon skeleton of organisms. These biomolecules will be useful to production of other form of biomolecules, then organs, tissues, etc. etc. That means act as a carbon skeleton of organisms. So these biomolecules will be useful for some characteristic features of a living organism. That means growth, development, reproduction, movement, excretion, etc. All characteristic features of a living organism. On earth, on land, different habitats of organisms are present. These are mountains, forest, deserts, then plain lands, hot springs, sulfur springs, extremely cold condition. All these organisms express unique characteristic features. These all organisms link one to one by sharing the common genetic material. In all these organisms, same type of chemical act as a genetic material. Then Earth was discovered nearly 4.6 billion years ago. So Earth was discovered or formed. Earth was formed nearly 4.6 billion years ago. So this Earth of the planet is a main source for living organisms. On this Earth of the planet, different types of habitats are present. Both living and non-living habitats are present. So these are mountains, forests, deserts, hot springs, then fresh water, lands, bodies, etc. etc. So livings are present mixture of these all habitats. This known as a biosphere. So including living and non-living. So living present mixture of these all habitats is known as a biosphere. So this biosphere contain the variety habitats of organism. Diverse group of living organisms are present. So in biosphere, number of mysteries wonders are present. That means microscopic organisms to large big organisms are there. We are unable to see these microscopic organisms with our naked eye, but the activities of these all organisms including microscopic to macroscopic organism capture our attention towards that particular organisms. So for example, flower. Flower in a sunflower plants belongs to Asteraceae family, responds to sunlight. These move towards to sunlight. So response of the flower in sunflower plants stimulus or a response towards the sunlight. Next one, fireflies. Fireflies. So these fireflies are twinkling even in a dark forest in a dark condition. So fireflies twinkling in a dark condition also like a bioluminescence. Next one, number of plants are insectivorous plants are present. In these insectivorous plants, leaves and some other parts are modified to picture and some other modified structures. These structures will be useful for capture the insects for fulfilling nitrogen deficiency and mineral deficiency. So number of plants, so Dracaena, Diascorea, Nepenthes, etc. So when insect land on that particular modified plant part, this part will automatically close. So capture then will fulfill their nitrogen and mineral deficiency. It is also one kind of a wonder in our planet. Next one, spats. So generally spats are squeezing ink for escape from the predators. So these spats are squeezing ink for escape from predators. Next one, the water rolling on a leaf surface of lotus plants. So on lotus plant leaf, plant leaf, water is a rolling condition without wet condition due to cutex is present. So these all are the mysteries, wonders in on earth. So these mysteries, wonders capture our attention towards the particular organisms. This is all because of a chemical substance, that means metabolic reactions. So metabolic reactions regulates by common chemical substance. These chemical substance may be act as a genetic material, nothing but DNA. So all living organisms what are present on a planet of Earth sharing common genetic material, that means DNA, but varying degree. It's depending on that particular organism. So these all mysteries are wonders due to regulates by this common genetic material. This common genetic material regulates different types of metabolic process. This metabolism is responsible for these wonders and mysteries. So these wonders and mysteries, both living and non-living habitat, make our Earth planet is unique in a condition. Then Mora et al. So Mora et al. So Mora and is associates try to estimate how many living species are might be possible on Earth of a planet. So in the year of 2011, Mora and et al. Mora and his associate try to estimate how many species might be possible on Earth of a planet. So based on their estimation, approximately 8.7 million species are maybe present on a Earth of a planet. So out of these 8.7, 1.7 to 1.8 million species are identified and described. So out of 8.7 estimated approximately species, 1.7 to 1.8 million species are identified and described known species. So out of this 1.7 to 1.8, 1.25 are animals. 1.25 are animals, then 0.5 are plants. Rest of are other microscopic organisms, microbes, etc. All these organisms express a unique characteristic features. So what is living? What is living? So living is nothing but aggregation of molecules. That means which biological entity express a unique characteristic features is known as a living or a life. So life or living means biological entities express a unique characteristic features. This known as a living. Nothing but attributes of living organisms. Attributes of living organisms. Unique characteristic features. Example: metabolism, reproduction, growth, nutrition, movement, respiration, irritability, excretion. Some attributes of living are metabolism, reproduction, growth, nutrition, movement, respiration, irritation, then excretion. So unique characteristic features of living organisms are growth, reproduction, metabolism, cellular organization, responsiveness. Responsiveness is nothing but a consciousness, irritability, then respiration, nutrition, so movement, excretion, homeostasis, adaptation, aging, senescence, death, life cycle. So which biological entity express this all unique characteristic features, attributes is known as a life. So these are growth, reproduction, metabolism, cellular organization, responsiveness, respiration, nutrition, movement, excretion, homeostasis, adaptation, aging, senescence, death, and life cycle. So we have to discuss about all this one by one. So first one coming to growth. So growth is a characteristic features of a living organism. So growth is a characteristic feature of all living organism. So growth means a permanent irreversible change occurs in body parts of a organism. So permanent irreversible change takes place in body parts of a organism. Permanently increase in mass, dry weight of organism, then cell number, individual number of a organism is known as a growth. So growth means permanent irreversible increase in body parts of organism, that means mass, dry weight, then individual number, cell number of a organism is known as a growth. So growth takes place in both living organisms and non-living organisms. It is a one characteristic features of a living organism. This growth is a result of metabolic activities like anabolism and catabolism. Growth takes place in both living and non-living organisms. Generally, growth is a result of cell division in both unicellular and multicellular organisms. Unicellular organism, then multicellular organism. So unicellular means which organisms completes its life cycle, the total life cycle by a single cell. That means these organisms have capability to perform all activities what are required to complete its life cycle is known as a unicellular organisms. So multicellular organisms body composed by different types of cells. All these cells work together for being of a living condition. In unicellular organisms, growth is nothing but increase the cell number. That means one cell divide to form a two cells. It is also nothing but reproduction. In unicellular organisms, growth means increase the cell number. That means one cell divide to form a two cells, then two cells divide to form four cells, then four cells divide to form eight cells respectively. In unicellular organisms, growth is nothing but reproduction. That means increase the cell number is nothing but reproduction. So for example, in prokaryotic organisms, unicellular reproduction by the cell division, binary fission. So growth and reproduction in unicellular organisms are synonymous condition. In unicellular organisms, growth we can measure by counting the number of cells in vitro condition, in laboratory condition, in test tubes and vessels. So in unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are both synonymous condition. These are occurs immediately. Both are takes place at a time. So in unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are inclusive events. Inclusive events. In unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction both are inclusive events. Nothing but takes place at a time. Growth is nothing but reproduction. Reproduction is nothing but growth. So both are synonyms in a condition. Then in multicellular organisms also, growth takes place by the cell division. By the cell division, increase the number of cells, so increase the mass of body parts of organisms. But in multicellular organisms, growth is distinct, then reproduction is distinct. That means growth takes place at a different time, reproduction takes place distinct at different times, not occurs at a time. So both are exclusive events. Both occurs exclusively. In multicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are exclusive events. In unicellular inclusive events. So generally, growth occurs by production of different types of substances. That means accumulate these different types. That means new substances. These substances are two types. These are protoplasmic substances, then apoplasmic substances, protoplasmic substances, then apoplasmic substances. So protoplasmic substances add to protoplasm. These includes cytoplasm and nucleus. Cytoplasm and nucleus, living materials. Then apoplasmic substances are non-living materials. So these are add include to cell wall, then cell membrane, then fibers of connective tissue. Fibers of connective tissue, cartilage tissues, etc. Apoplasmic. Then in living organisms, growth occurs inside. It is a intrinsic growth. So in living organisms, growth occurs inner side condition. So it is a intrinsic growth. So this intrinsic growth by intussusception. So intussusception is a nothing but add the materials to inner side of the cell. This is known as a intussusception. In living organisms, growth is a intrinsic growth, like a intracellular growth. Then in non-living things, growth is a extrinsic condition, extracellular growth, like mountains, boulders, sand, mounds. So in these non-living things, growth by addition of materials on surface, addition of materials, accumulation of some substances on this surface. So increase the size of these materials. This is known as a accretion. This is known as intussusception and accretion. So accretion means accumulation of non-living materials on surface of this non-living materials. This is known as accretion. Then inner side is known as intussusception. So in living organisms, growth is intrinsic growth by the intussusception. Then in non-living organisms, accumulation of materials on surface, this is known as accretion. In plants, growth occurs throughout life. That means indefinite growth takes place. In plants, growth occurs throughout life. Indefinite growth, unlimited growth. So in plants, growth is a localized growth. Then open form of growth. So in plants, growth is a localized growth and open form of growth. So localized growth means generally growth takes place inside. So plants are living condition. It is nothing but localized growth. Open form of growth means at a certain locations meristematic cells are present in plant body. These meristematic cells are responsible to add new cells. These meristematic cells will add new cells to continuously to plant body. So this is known as a open form of growth and localized growth. In plant, growth occurs throughout life due to certain locations meristematic cells are present. But in animals, growth occurs up to certain period only, like limiting growth. But in zygote condition, unlimited growth. In plants also, some plant parts, flowers and leaf, maybe limited growth is present. But dead organisms do not show the growth. Dead organisms do not shows the growth. So due to this one, that means both living and non-living things can shows the growth. So we cannot take a defining property of living. So growth, we cannot take a defining property of growth. Next one, coming to reproduction. So reproduction means the production of new individuals, daughter ones from the existing ones, nothing but parents. This is known as a reproduction. So reproduction also important characteristic feature of a living organism. Why? Because reproduction enables surviving of organisms from one generation to another generation. At the same time, reproduction is responsible to continuity of the living organisms into future generations also. So reproduction is a important characteristic feature of living organisms. So reproduction generally two types. So it is a sexual reproduction. Next one, sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction, sexual. So asexual means the production of new individuals by the participation of a single parent. So it is a uniparental condition. It is a uniparental condition. So by the participation of one parent, nothing but by the vegetative somatic tissue. So production of new individuals. This is known as a asexual reproduction by the different methods. Without production of gametes, without fusion of gametes, without syngamy. So directly production of new individuals by the mitotic division. So these newly produced daughter individuals are exotic copy to parents. That means qualitatively, quantitatively exotic copy to parents. This is known as a clones. Single clone is known as a ramage. Asexual reproduction by the different methods. So for example, fragmentation. So fragmentation means a parental body due to some adverse conditions break into small fragments. So each fragment have the ability to develop into a new adult organism. This is known as a fragmentation. Generally fragmentation takes place in lower organization of plants and some animals. So algal members, then some fungal members, bryophytes and pteridophytes. Fragmentation, examples Spirogyra, algal members, then bryophytes and pteridophytes. Next one, by the production of spores, different types of spores. So these are conidias, zoospores, planospores, then neutral spores, statospores, suridias, etc. So conidias generally ascomycetes fungal members, Aspergillus, Penicillium, etc. Aspergillus and Penicillium. Next one, budding. So budding is nothing but a external one outgrowth of structure is known as a bud. After mature bud, this bud is separated from the parents, then grow into a new individual organism. This is known as a budding. So budding also shows by the yeast, hydra, yeast, then hydras, then some sponges, etc. Next one, regeneration. So regeneration is nothing but growth takes place on injured tissues, structures, etc. By this regeneration, maybe from the one fragment, by the one fragment develop into a new organism or restores the injured tissues, structure or body parts of the organism. This is called regeneration. So regeneration mainly takes place in hydra, then planaria, some diatoms, etc. So regeneration first discovered in hydra. True regeneration takes place in planaria. That means by a single fragment developed into an entire organism. Next one, sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction means production of new individuals by the participation of two parents. These two parents are opposite sex condition, like a male and a female. Biparental condition. Parental condition. So in sexual reproduction, maybe recombination, exchange of genetic material takes place of meiotic division. So in meiotic division, crossing over takes place, results of crossing over, exchange of genetic material. This lead to variations of characters, recombinants. That's why daughter individuals what are producing through the sexual reproduction, these are similar to parents only, not exact copy to parents, only similar to parents. The sexual reproduction will permits to variations of characters, evolution of characters. These characters will be useful for adaptation of organisms to modified environment. Results of sexual reproduction, organisms are surviving from millions of years by the evolution of number of characters. So these are prerequisite requirement to adapt in a changed environment, sexual and asexual reproduction. But some living organisms cannot do the reproduction. These are mules, then sterile worker bees, then infertile human couples. Sterile worker bees are mules and infertile human beings cannot perform the reproduction. Next one, reproductive cycles maybe takes place in life cycle of organism one time or more number of times. Based on these organisms, two types. So these are semiparous, then heteroparous. Semiparous and heteroparous. Semiparous means a reproductive cycle only once in life cycle of organism. Some organism, annual plants, biennial plants, spiders, invertebrates, etc. Next one, heteroparous. Heteroparous means shows the more number of reproductive cycles in life cycle of organism. That means human beings, birds, other animals, cat, rat, elephant, dog, etc. etc. All are heteroparous condition. So both living and non-living organisms shows the characteristic features of reproduction, but some living organisms cannot reproduce. So reproduction we cannot take a defining property of a living organism. So reproduction, both the growth and reproduction, we cannot take a defining property of a living beings. Next one, metabolism. So metabolism means different types of chemical reactions or takes place in organisms body. Some of all chemical reactions is known as a metabolism. This metabolism is responsible to transform one form of biochemicals to another form of biochemicals. So synthesizing these biochemicals will useful for all characteristic features of living organism. That means exhibit characteristic features of living organism. Without metabolism, organisms cannot survive. Metabolism will help to study and state of living organisms. So metabolism is a most important characteristic features of a living organism. Both the reproduction and metabolism both are important characteristic features of a living organism, but in comparative way metabolism importance is higher than the reproduction. So generally virus considered as a non-living condition. Why? Because virus do not shows any metabolism. So that's why virus is considered as a non-living things. So metabolism generally anabolism, then catabolism. So anabolism is a constructive process, catabolism is a destructive process. Best example, photosynthesis, then synthesis of formation of proteins, nucleic acids, carbohydrates, etc. These all are anabolism. Assimilative process, constructive process by the simple aggregation of simple molecules, inorganic molecules. For example, in photosynthesis, aggregation of CO2, H2O and lighter energy, so production of carbohydrates. That means simple to complex. Energy levels also very high. Energy levels are low in reactants in photosynthesis. In products, energy levels are very high in condition. This also known as a endorganic process. Photosynthesis is known as endorganic. That means the energy obtaining process from its surrounding. This obtained energy aggregate to form a complex macromolecules. Endorganic process, photosynthesis. Next one, catabolism. So catabolism is a destructive process, breaking a process. It is a build-up process. It is a breaking a process. Destruction of macromolecules. By this destruction break, these macromolecules, complex molecules convert into simpler molecules. In this process, release the energy. Here consume the energy, here release the energy. So that's why this known as a exorganic process, energy releasing process. But in this process, in reactants, more amount of energy is present, but in products, less amount of energy. That's why this known as an exorganic process. Release the energy into its surroundings. Respiration, best example is a respiration. Respiration is a catabolic process. Then this metabolism we can see outside the body of organism in isolated cells. So in vitro condition, in test tubes and culture vessels, etc. But it is not a living thing, only living reaction only. So isolated metabolic reactions outside the body of an organism, in vitro condition, in laboratory, in test tubes and culture vessels, only living reaction, not a living things, only living reaction only. Then non-living things do not shows the metabolism, only living things shows the metabolism. So metabolism is a common for all living beings without exemption. So we can take a defining property of living, metabolism. Growth and reproduction we cannot take a defining property of living things, but metabolism we can take a defining property of living things. Why? Because without metabolism there is no possibility chance of living beings. Next one, cellular organization. Cellular organization, nothing but cellular structure. All organisms body composed by the cells. So 1 to trillions of cells are present, unicellular to multicellular organisms. 1 to trillions of cells. For example, in human body, approximately 37.2 trillions of cells are present. So based on these cells are two types. So prokaryotic cell, then eukaryotic cell. Mesokaryotic cell also present, but main are prokaryotes and eukaryotic cell. So pro means a previous condition. So first evolved cell without a well defined nucleus. That means genetic material is a naked condition, freely in a cytoplasm of a cell. So for example, in bacteria, genetic material is present in a nucleide, pronucleus. So without histone proteins, naked condition, single chromosomic condition, double stranded condition. All membrane bound cell organelles are absent in a prokaryotic cell. Examples: bacteria, blue-green algae, actinomycetes, mycoplasmas, etc. Next one, eukaryotic cell. That means a true cell. Which cell with a well defined nucleus? That means genetic material present within a nucleus without membrane bound condition. So within membrane bound condition, genetic material present within membrane bound structure, nucleus, well defined nucleus is present. This cell is known as a eukaryotic cell. So along this one, all membrane bound cell organelles are present, like endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi complex, maybe in plants, plastids, mitochondria, lysosomes, etc., vacuoles, etc. Eukaryotic cell and prokaryotic. So eukaryotic cells are generally unicellular and multicellular condition. Prokaryotic cells generally unicellular condition. Then eukaryotic unicellular amoeba, euglena, paramecium, etc. Then multicellular condition, Eidogonium, animals, plants, etc., etc. Yeah, cellular organization. So this organization of the organisms body in varying levels. The basic level is atom. The basic level is atom. So in atom to then molecule. Atom to molecule. So these molecules are colloids condition, then crystals condition, then mixed condition. So these are two are non-living. These are two are non-living condition. The basic organization level is a atom. Then atom to molecular. So molecules colloidal nature, crystal nature are mixed condition. Then molecule to cell organelles. Cellular organelles. So cell organelles are present within inside the cell. So these membrane bound structures inside the cell, both unicellular and multicellular condition, especially in eukaryotic organisms. Then cell organelle, cell is a living. So cell organelles and cell are a living condition. Next one, tissue. A group of cells that means similar structure and similar function, origin and function both are similar condition. This is known as a tissues. In tissue, these similar cells work together. Next one, tissue to organ. Then organ to organ system. So tissue, a group of similar tissues form a organ. Then a group of similar organs form a organ system. True organ system is present in animals. In plants, true organ system is absent. But root system, then shoot system is present. That is not a true organ system like animals. Next one, organ system to organism. Organism. It is an individual organism. Organism is an individual. Then individual organism to group of organism. Population. Then population to community. Then community to ecosystem. Ecosystem to biosphere. Ecosystem to biosphere. So individual organism to population, population to ecosystem, ecosystem to biosphere. So from cell organelle to biosphere. So these are living condition, organization of organisms. All organisms are composed by cells. So without cells, organisms cannot show the independent nature. Even unicellular organisms also shows the independent nature. So without this complete cell, organisms cannot show a independent nature. That's why cell organization we can take a defining property of a living organism. Both the metabolism and the cellular organization we can take a defining property of a living things. Next one. Consciousness. Next one, consciousness, irritability, responsiveness. So consciousness, responsiveness or irritability. All organisms have the ability to respond to its surrounding environment. All organisms have the ability to respond to its surrounding. This ability is known as a consciousness responsive ness. That means organism respond to external stimulus, environmental stimulus. This environmental stimulus is a physical stimulus, chemical stimulus, or biochemical stimulus. External stimulus, environmental stimulus. Organism respond to this external stimuli is known as a consciousness, responsiveness, or irritability. Irritability. So, for example, animals respond to external environment by the sense organs, but the sense organs are absent in plants. That means plants lack the sense organs. So, plants respond to external environmental factors. That means temperature, air, wind, humidity, etc., etc. So, for example, plants respond to sunlight, unilateral light. Then touch me not plant, Mimosa pudica. If we touch the leaves of Mimosa pudica, it will automatically close the leaves. That means rolling and unrolling mechanism generally present in a leaf base. So these responses is known as a consciousness, responsiveness, irritability. So it is a common feature for all living organisms. So we can take a defining property of a living: metabolism, then cellular organization, consciousness, irritability, responsiveness. We can take a defining property of a living things. Next one, nutrition. So all living organisms requires the energy to carry out daily life activities. So uptake of this energy, then consume this energy, entire process is known as a nutrition. Nourishment, which chemical substances will useful for growth of the organism, is known as a nourishment. So the process of uptake and utilization these substances what are useful for growth and development of organism, this method is known as a nutrition. So based on the nutrition, organisms are two types. So these are autotrophs, then heterotrophs. Autotrophs and heterotrophs. So autotrophs can prepare the food materials by self. So for example, photosynthesis plants. So plants can prepare the food material by trap the light energy, then H2O and CO2. It is a constructive process, anabolic process. This type of organisms is known as a autotrophs. Plants, some photosynthetic bacteria. Then heterotrophs, animals, other fungi, some non-green plants depend on autotrophs for nourishment. This is known as a heterotrophic organisms. Next one, respiration. Respiration means oxidative breakdown of these nutrients what are provided nutrition for organisms. This process is known as a respiration. So generally photosynthesis is a constructive process. Respiration is a destructive process. Break the macromolecules. By break the macromolecules, destruction of these macromolecules release the energy. So this released energy stored in high chemical bonds. It is ATP. Example, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This adenosine triphosphate stores the energy. But in respiration process, less than 50% of energy stored in the form of ATP. More than 50% of energy released in the form of heat. So aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration efficiency is approximately 45%. Anaerobic respiration efficiency approximately below 7%. So ATP is known as a energy currency of a cell, universal energy carrier. So this ATP will provide energy wherever organism requires the energy. This ATP immediately undergoes to hydrolysis, provides the energy in fraction of a seconds. So ATP, in ATP 3 inorganic phosphates are present. 3 bonds are alpha, beta, gamma bonds are present. So third bond has the highest amount of energy. By the hydrolysis of this third bond, approximately 8.9 kilocalories of energy. Second bond 6.5 kilocalories of energy. Then third bond approximately 3.5 kilocalories of energy. Approximately 34 joules of energy stores in ATP molecules. Respiration. Next one, movement. So organisms, animals and some unicellular organisms shows the movement. That means move from one place to another place. This ability is known as a locomotion. This ability is known as a locomotion. Is nothing but the ability of organisms move from one place to another place. Locomotion. So animals have the ability to locomotion. This locomotion will be useful for get the food, shelter, then reproduction process, mating process. But plants lacks this movement. But plants can fulfill all requirements by the dispersal and restricted, narrow, limited movements are present in plants. Next one, excretion. In living organisms body, all cells will continuously produce a lot of waste materials. So organism need to elimination, excretion of this material. So in organisms body, all cells will continuously produce the waste material. Organism need to remove all these materials. The ability of organism remove these waste materials is known as a excretion process. If not excretion takes place, it might be poisonous to organism. It lead to death of organism. This ability is known as a excretion. So generally CO2 and H2O. CO2, H2O considered as a universal waste materials. CO2 and H2O considered as a universal waste. So for example, photosynthesis and respiration. H2O, so waste materials, that means a byproduct. Next one, CO2 in respiration. In animals, nitrogenous wastes. So for example, ammonia, H2, then uric acid, then urea. These are the waste material. Animals elimination, excretion, remove these nitrogenous wastes by kidneys. But this type of structures are absent in plants. Plants eliminate, excretes these materials by the stomata. So in plants, that means the stomata will be useful for exchange of the gases only. That means CO2, O2. Next one, homeostasis. Homeostasis. So homeostasis means the ability of the organism maintain a favorable dynamic consistency internal environment. This is known as a homeostasis. It is a self-regulation process. Homeostasis means maintain the favorable dynamic consistency of internal environment body of organism. Homeostasis, self-regulation of a body of organism. This homeostasis help to surviving of organism in a changed environment. The homeostasis are first discovered by phenomena science is homeostasis maintained by organism regulatory system. So regulatory system maintain this homeostasis in body of organisms. These homeostasis work even continuous changes takes place in environment. So homeostasis will work in body of organism even continuous changes takes place in environment. These homeostasis present in all organization levels from cellular level to ecosystem levels. So for example, thermoregulation. Thermoregulation, that means temperature maintenance. Thermoregulation. So it is a two types of ectothermic then endothermic. Ectothermic organisms, endothermic. So based on this thermoregulation, organisms are two types: ectothermic organisms and endothermic organisms. In ectothermic organisms, body temperature is variable to environmental condition. Ectothermic organisms body temperature is variable to environmental temperature. That means it's a surrounding temperature. These type of organisms also known as a cold-blooded animals. Cold-blooded animals. Ectothermic organisms, cold-blooded, oil kilo thermic organisms. Examples: fishes, then amphibians, reptiles, then invertebrates. These are examples. So ectothermic means temperature is a variable, body temperature is a variable to surrounding environment. These organisms also known as a cold-blooded animals, poikilothermic organisms. Example: fishes, amphibians, reptiles, invertebrates. Next one, endothermic organism. In this organism, body temperature is a constant condition, independent nature to surrounding environment. In endothermic organisms, body temperature is a constant condition, not a variable condition. It is independent to surrounding environment. This is also known as a warm-blooded animals, homeotherms. Warm-blooded animals, homeotherms. Example: human beings, birds, and some other animals. Exothermic, ectothermic, and endothermic. Homeostasis. Next one, adaptation. Adaptation. All organisms need to adapt to changed environment. If any changes takes place in an environment, organism need to adapt to that particular environment, adjusted to that particular environment. This is known as a adaptation. So organisms are adapted to particular changed environment by changes takes place in structure and function body parts of an organism. That means cell, tissues, organs, and organ system are entire body of organisms. These changes may be permanent changes or temporary changes. Smooth adjustment changes takes place. So based on this adaptation is two types of long term adaptation, then short term adaptation. So long term adaptation, then short term adaptation. In long term adaptation, permanent changes takes place in structure and function of a organism. This is due to changes takes place in a genetic material of a organism. Due to changes in genetic material, it is an inheritable condition, transfer from one generation to another generation. These type of changes do not disappear by of this environmental changes. So these type of changes do not disappear. So even in disappear of environmental changed condition. So environmental changes if not disappears. So these also do not disappear. Why? Because these are the inheritable in a condition. Next one, short-term adaptation. So short-term adaptation are temporary changes. Temporary changes, short-lived changes, smooth adjustment changes takes place to change the environment. In absence of this stressful environment, these are disappear condition. Generally, long-term adaptations are inheritable changes. These are the permanent changes. These do not disappear in absence of stressful environment. But the short-term adaptations disappear in absence of stressful environment. If a stressful environment is there, temporary changes, smooth adjustment changes in structure and functions of organism takes place. If a stressful environment or disappear, these changes also disappears. These are not inheritable in condition. So temporary changes only. It is known as a short-term adaptations. These are two types: hibernation, then estivation. Hibernation and estivation. Hibernation also known as a winter sleep is known as a summer sleep. So winter sleep and summer sleep adaptation. Next one, aging. Aging, senescence, then death, then life cycle. So next one coming to aging. So aging is a one progressive step. So progressive deterioration in body structure of a organism, both in structure and function of a organism, is known as a aging. So aging is a nothing but progressive deterioration in structure and function, body parts of a organism. It is only one progressive step in body parts of a organism. This aging due to degeneration of body parts, cells, tissues, organs, etc. So generally, aging not takes place at the end of the reproductive cycle of organism. Aging may takes place in any stage, in any body parts of organism. So total body aging may be lead to death of the organism, but some parts aging not lead to death of the organism. It is a one progressive deterioration in body parts of a organism. It is not end of reproductive cycle of organism. Next one, senescence. So senescence means permanent aging, permanent irreversible aging in body parts of organism. This is known as a senescence. So senescence it lead to death of a organism. Senescence means permanent irreversible aging takes place in structure and function body parts of organism. Senescence. So senescence generally lead to death of a organism, or senescence takes place at the end of a reproductive cycle of a organisms. Next one, death. So death means permanently stop all vital important activities of a organism. Permanent cessation of all activities of a organism. This is known as a death. So death generally two types. It is a biological death, then clinical death. Biological death and clinical death. So biological death means due to stop some activities in body parts of a organism. So for example, brain. So stoppage of activities in a brain, like brain death due to non-availability of nutrients and oxygen. That means a degeneration of body parts of organism, like a brain death and other parts due to non-availability of minerals, nutrients and oxygen. This is known as a biological death. So biological death means degeneration of body parts of organism due to non-availability of minerals, nutrients and oxygen, like a brain death. Next one, clinical death means a permanent cessation all activities of a organism. That means pulse, heartbeat, etc., etc. So organism cannot express the steady and state condition. This is known as a clinical death. Next one, life cycle. So life cycle of organism means the time period from natural birth to natural death. This is known as a life cycle. So the time period from natural birth to natural death, life cycle. So life cycle period of organism varies from one organism to another organism. So it's a few minutes to few thousands of years present. So for example, mayfly. So few hours, approximately 24 hours. This is also known as a one day insects. Then a fruit fly 1 to 2 weeks. Butterfly 1 month. Then rice plants 3 to 4 months. Then wheat plant 6 months. Like this, few thousands of years may be present, hundreds and thousands of years. So for example, parrot 140 years, tortoise 100 years, human beings approximately 100 years. Next one, people tree. So people tree 2000 to 3000 years. Ficus bengalensis banyan tree 200 to 300 years. Then Pinus longeva nearly 5000 years. Then Sequia semper virens, it is also hundreds of years. So life cycle of organism. So all living organisms are a mortal condition. That means all living organisms have the natural death. All living organisms are mortal condition except unicellular. Except unicellular organism. So unicellular organisms are immortal condition, have no death. That means proper time period in life cycle of organism. Why? Because in unicellular organisms, so one cell divide to form a two cells. So growth nothing but reproduction. In unicellular organisms, there is no particular reproductive units like gametes. Gametes are not present. That means entire parental body act as a one reproductive unit. So this entire reproductive unit split, divide to form a two daughter ones. That means parental body directly shares. So parental residues to daughter ones. That means parental body surviving as a daughter ones. So in this process there is no residues left for death. There is no residues left for death. So parental body shares its body, entire body to daughter ones. But in sexually reproducing organisms produce the definite discrete unit of reproductive structures. That means gametes, male gamete and female gametes, sperms and egg. By the fusion of this one then give birth to new individuals. That means the parental body not directly shares its body to daughter organisms. So give birth to through the discrete unit of structures, reproductive structures, gamete. But here parental body directly shares it's a parental residues to the daughter ones. That means parents are surviving, living as a daughter ones. The entire parental body acts as a reproductive units. So that's why unicellular are immortal. There is no maximum lifespan of a unicellular organism. So these are the characteristic features of a living organism. Among these all features, metabolism, then cellular organization, then consciousness, irritability, we can take a defining property of a living organism.